the 4th, going into the 5th of August 2023. You're very welcome back to the channel, and we're going to have a look here at the shift in global power. Now, you may have remember a few times talking about the geopolitical, as they call it, or the overall political and military situation in the world and the balance of power. And I really got involved in all this type of campaigning and all this sort of stuff when I realized that the energy policy that was being followed in the West, in Europe, in Britain, in America and Canada, was ridiculously hard on the environment. I wasn't going to deliver and would end in grief. And I'm inclined to come to the view that maybe I can't prove this now, and I have to be very careful, that China and Russia have been infiltrating Western society for about 10 years, maybe a little longer. It's very strange how some of the crazy things that are happening in the West, such as the mad climate hysteria, which can't be stopped until science catches up, maybe a way of doing it, the mad woke culture. We have a situation in England where the banks are taking accounts away from people who hunt, and the next thing it'll be who fish or who hold particular views about Europe or Brexit. This is the way it's gone, and it's more or less the same in the United States. So we see the treatment of former President Trump, and we see all this going on, and there's something very wrong. Now, could it be that the Chinese and the Russians promoted this? Maybe not organized it fully, but went with the flow, with a bit of finance here and there, and infiltrating students and all that. I'm only making that point. Now, we now see the situation where it was the idea of the West, the plan of the West, to spread their new woke culture worldwide. That was what the EU was about. That's what America was about. And when Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, there was consternation, and you see what they did to get him out and what they're still doing to get him out. And it's not going to be easy to change the swamp in Washington, or the EU swamp, or indeed the swamp which is in Britain. It's going to be very hard to change that, because these people are wedded to this. They're welded to it, you could say. In any event, we see the war in Ukraine. We know the Americans are pushing it. They're pushing the Europeans. They don't want a settlement. There's a summit planned soon between Saudi Arabia and the United States, led by them, may I say. And the idea is that Zelensky has insisted that the Russians clear off out of Crimea and leave all of the territory they occupied, the two western provinces of Donbass and the other one. And he wants that on the table. And Jake O'Sullivan, the secretary, he's going to try to get that, and he hasn't a snowball's chance in hell. He hasn't a hope. And his next backup point is, when he can't persuade the countries at this meeting to get the Russians to withdraw, his next move is to get them to impose further sanctions on Russia and to isolate Russia. He hasn't a snowball's chance in hell of that either. It's not going to happen. But they're that stupid that they think it will. In any event, we have a saying in Ireland called crack, C-R-I-C. It actually means fun or very interesting, something that you can laugh at which you're not involved in. So you see two people having a row at the fair, or two farmers having a row, you might stand back and look at it for the crack. If it's good crack, you see, that's what that means. It's all right till it comes to your own door, and then it's not so much crack. But it also means music and romance and all that. But anyway, there is crack now emerging, because there's a group of countries just in sub-Sahara, south of the Sahara, and one of them is Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, and the latest one is Niger. Different to Nigeria, it's Niger. Now, they're all roughly where Roscommon, Sligo, Leitrim is on the African continent in relation to Ireland. So north west, roughly. In any event, these areas were all French colonies. And I remember reading a book about the guillotine and the methods of execution. And the French introduced and kept the execution by guillotine in these countries for a long, long time. And there was a book actually written by an executioner how he'd hold them by the hair and the thing would come down and he'd try not to get the blood on his coat. This is what was going on there. So while we were getting a bit of stick from the British, the French were doing it over in Africa. Now, of course, what they should have done was try and get the right side of these people. And in a way, it's possible to a slight extent that the British, with the Commonwealth and all that, tried to shore up all the hardship that was caused with slavery and looting and all of that. I don't know how well they succeeded, maybe a little bit, but certainly the French just kept troops there. All the railway lines goes from the coast inwards to loot all the raw materials. In any way, whereas the Russian if I said air, I mean rail lines. I mean, I say airlines. Sorry, rail lines. If I tell all the railway lines built by the Russians are for community more. They're going more or less horizontally and for to join up the various countries. So what we may not have known is that the Russians and the Chinese are well dug in Africa and have got doing their thing. And 2 weeks ago, or a little more, Vladimir Putin announced that he was giving free grain to poor African countries to compensate for the lack of grain coming out of Ukraine. Okay, now funny enough, within 2 weeks of that, or a little more, a coup has happened in Niger. Okay, and there has been an earlier coup in Burkina Faso, and now this thing is that this country, Niger, it's not Niger, it's not Nigeria, excuse me, it's Niger, and that's a French name for it as well. But the thing about it is, it has 20% of the uranium. It's rich in uranium and gold. 20%, and don't you know, the mahogany as well. 20% of the uranium used in the EU comes from Niger, and about 15 to 16% of the uranium the French use, they have huge amount of nuclear power, comes from Niger. See, so while the EU are telling us how independent they are and how green they are with their nuclear power, they weren't independent because they were depending on countries like Niger. So anyway, last week a coup occurred, and as that coup happens and ousted the original leader, they're shoving out the French. They're essentially doing like Idi Amin did in Uganda. They're ordering the French home. Everyone white has to go unless they are Russian. The new leader it was connected to the Russian ambassador to Niger, and he is a member of the Russian Orthodox Church in a country which is 99% Muslim or Islam. Yet the people are out in the streets cheering him and cheering on the new regime. And the same happened in Burkina Faso, and that leader there, a young man, went to see Putin, and when he came back, he wasn't afraid to go. When he came back, he was cheered on the streets with thousands out. So clearly, the Russians and the Chinese have been doing their homework in these countries, and they're well ingrained there. And the EU and France and the Americans had a more bullying approach. They didn't use the wee bit of persuasion. Now, it'd be very hard for the West to be accepted in these countries. I can't, as an Irishman, accept their dictate in Ireland. They've made life impossible for people in Ireland. They're forcing heat pumps. You soon won't be able to sell your house. They won't let chimneys go in houses. They have all this pronouns and LGBTQ and cancel culture forced down our throats. Totally corrupt public broadcasters, and it seems impossible to get them out, even though we are a democracy. Now this is being pushed on the Africans, and the Africans are saying no. Well, what's very interesting is what's going to happen now, and this is where the word crack comes in. What is Macron going to do? There is a group of countries in the area which are mildly pro-Western, and but these few countries aren't. And it looks like the government in Niger was just a puppet government. I don't know how elections would work out there. It looks like it was a puppet government for the French. The French have troops there, and the Americans have troops there. But more interestingly, there's talk that Wagner are in there, that the Wagner group are actually in there. And so, if any kind of a shooting war breaks out, you could see the French pitted against Wagner. And that, as it is in Ukraine, Wagner Wagner, doesn't matter. Wagner Group are now withdrawn from there. They're in Belarus and they have the wind up the poles. They're getting afraid of the Polish people. Polish government are getting afraid of Wagner. But Wagner is in 11 countries in Africa. You know from our fake media in Ireland, we never heard of them till Ukraine was invaded. Why wasn't there a programme done on them 2 or 3 years ago during the COVID to inform the people? No, they hid the fact that this group existed. They're closely aligned to the Russian president. They are an arm of the Russian military, and they're well ingrained in these countries. And the extent to which they're ingrained in Niger is not fully known by me, but it won't take long for them to get in there if the thing happens, if need be. So what we're now looking at is, what is President Macron going to do? He's getting some roasting. What is he going to do? Is he going to invade? What will the Americans do? Will the British get into it? Will there be an attempt to recolonize an African country? How will Russia act? We know from looking at the video footage that the people in Niger are fully Russian behind. They're fully behind Russia. They see the Russians as their friend. They talk about the Russians losing 20 million people fighting Nazis. And it looks like they have their homework done. So while the American, the Canadian, the EU, the Irish, the British governments were busy trying to indoctrinate their people like me, and a few of us spotted what they were at, these Russians and the Chinese have been having their own little bit of indoctrination, their own little bit of influence in these countries. And Africa has the youngest population on the planet. It is the future. If they can educate and train the Africans, not only will they be able to supply the needs and wants of Africa, they would also be used as a labour force voluntarily to come and work in China and Russia to do a lot of projects and earn money and all of that. Rightly or wrongly, it's now been perceived by the people of these areas that I've mentioned, Niger, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and all these places you probably never heard of. But it's now been realised that there's an awakening, and the EU was hopelessly inadequate to handle Africa. Africa is not listening to their old baloney. They don't want to hear their old baloney or hear anything to do with it. And Jake Sullivan, he's an Irish name, Jake O'Sullivan, might as well be idle. He is not going to get Putin to withdraw from where he has taken in Ukraine, and that is not going to happen at all. It's not going to happen, and I say that here and now. I predicted Ukraine would go on at least 2 years. It looks like I'm right. The cost in lives to the Ukrainian people is unbelievable. It is unbelievable cruelty. So that's the story, folks. But the fun now is that this night, we'd say we're the 5th of August 2023 now. The candles are burning, the lights are on in France, in Paris, while Macron, who could do with this like a hole in the head, Macron is facing losing the whole goodwill of Africa and being kicked out. They are already evacuating people. They are forced out. They are being made illegal for the French to be in this country, and so the rest of the Europeans and all the rest. Watch what will happen. Will the French soldiers have to pack up and go? Will the Americans have to pack up and go? And what's going to happen? My job is to bring it to your attention in the best way I can with the limited resources that are available. But it is a gas situation. It really is a funny situation where the whole prediction, and I mentioned this months ago, folks, about Africa, and the way that the West tried to handle it and are doomed to failure, and the way that Russia and China are handling it. These are dictatorships, and that's the way the world is going. We've made a complete hames of it. We've made a complete hames of it. Nobody's listening to their green, woke, cultural Marxist baloney. It's only working a little local. It's not working anywhere else. So, folks, that's it. You can give me a thumbs up and thumbs down. Maybe some of you would know more about it than I do, and I do apologise. I'm as best read up on it as I can be. I can only give you the facts. I read a bit about these countries years ago. We know about the slavery. We know what went on. But it's been going on, and for even up to recent times. Now, let me add that Niger is an independent country, in a way, but it's not fully independent in that the president or the government cannot do what it likes. It couldn't fight the Americans, it couldn't fight the French and the Europeans or the British on their own. There'd be war, but the Europeans would probably, and the Americans would probably come out on top, and then they're stuck in there forevermore. But if they have Wagner behind them, and if they have the guiding hand of China and Putin, I'm telling you, it could be a different story. And if a war breaks out, it's going to be an unbelievable situation to see and to watch and how it pans out. I have no doubt the French could well be kicked out of it and will lose no matter what happens. And that's what they have done. And that's how the American people voting for sleepy Joe Biden, that's what you have done when you went in and marked the ballot paper, those of you who did it. That's what the Irish people have done when they vote for our parties, and that's what the system in Britain has managed to thwart the view of the British people in Brexit by keeping this culture, woke culture, going against the wishes of the people. But it won't work in Russia, it won't work in China, and now it won't work in Africa. It won't work in Africa. And I hear tonight that Italy, it is a conservative lady prime minister, that Italy has said not to intervene, leave them alone, try and do a bit of negotiations and a bit of diplomacy and all of that. I think it doesn't matter. The bird has flown. So I don't think you're going to see a puppet government restored to Niger anytime soon. Folks, give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. Really is crack, as we say. Really is interesting. Nobody has died so far, and that's the great thing about it. So right, that's it. Just to give you that, you see the way this thing is crumbling. As the economies of the West crumble, you pay a price for this type of carry on. There is a very, very dear price to be paid. That's it. We'll see you. Thumbs up or thumbs down. Thank you very much.